Ladies and gentlemen, I know one or two other colleagues are joining us from other meetings this afternoon, and it is getting close to Christmas holidays, but nevertheless, I'd like to give a very big welcome to Mr. Benetonis and Mr. Barakauskas from the Lithuanian presidency, and I'm going to ask them to talk to us, give us an assessment on the activities of the Lithuanian presidency in the field of JHA. I think they will probably say, and we've observed this, certainly I think it has been a very good-hearted presidency, I think a very positive presidency. There may be one or two things that perhaps we haven't seen concluded during that presidency, and I hesitate on data protection. Whenever I mention data protection, I always get into trouble, so I won't. But in terms of things like the European Investigation Order, issues of confiscation of the proceeds of crime, I think there have been some notable achievements, and I'm sure there are many others too. But I'm going to ask our visitors to speak to us, and then obviously they'd be pleased, I'm sure, to take questions and comments. So first of all, perhaps I could ask you, Mr. Benetonis, you have the floor. Thank you.
Pone pirmininkė.
Mr. Chairperson, honourable members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first thank you for the opportunity to present the results of the Lithuanian presidency in the area of justice. Even though this has been the first presidency of the Council of the European Union for Lithuania, the results achieved and the work done have been gratifying. All members of the presidency team made tremendous contributions to ensure that the aims of the Lithuanian presidency presented to you in July would be achieved. It goes without saying that achieving these noticeable results would have been impossible without the help of the European Union institutions. Therefore, let me express my gratitude to the European Parliament and its members, especially for this committee, for the cooperation and assistance during the presidency. I believe that throughout the presidency we were able to ensure a smooth and continuous legislative procedure while remaining honest and impartial mediators that involved all the related parties in this process. We hope that you're not disappointed in the results of the presidency, and today I would like to present these results in short. During the presidency, the major focus was on three main goals: the creation of a credible, growing and open Europe. During the presidency, in the area of justice, we devoted key attention to measures that would return trust in the European Union, would stimulate growth of the economy and employment, strengthen the common market, ensure financial stability, reinforce economic and monetary union, and ensure safety of financial interests of the European Union. We also approved three groups of conclusions of the Council in the area of fundamental rights. Much attention was devoted to strengthening relations of the European Union with the third parties, especially with Eastern Partnership countries. One of the horizontal aims was creation of a credible Europe with stable finances and effective EU economy management. We have been working to strengthen the citizens' trust in the areas of freedom, safety and justice. Progress in the area of justice contributed to the creation of a credible Europe. The topic we worked most intensively on in the past 6 months was consolidation of safety in the European Union financial interest by criminal law measures. Here we dealt with both already available as well as completely new initiatives. The proposal effectively contributing to the creation of a credible Europe is the directive on the protection of the euro and other currencies against counterfeiting by criminal law. We strongly believe that this instrument is important in ensuring stability of the euro and other currencies, as well as proper protection against counterfeiting. This initiative is relevant to the presidency from the national point of view. We are happy that we were able to complete negotiations on this initiative by reaching a common standpoint in the Council in October. We believe that negotiations with the European Parliament on this proposal will be constructive and successful, and that we will be able to reach agreement at the first reading. Another particularly important priority of the presidency, to which the presidency country devoted special attention, is the directive on confiscation and social reuse of criminal assets. We are happy to see that during the presidency you were able to reach an agreement with the Parliament on this proposal. I believe that approval of this proposal is a tremendous step made towards ensuring that crime is not profitable. Even though the negotiations were not easy due to differences between the positions of the institutions, we are satisfied that we are able to reach a common compromise and agree on the text of the legal act. We would like to thank the rapporteur of the LIBE Committee, Monica Luisa Macovei, for her contribution in the search for mutual solutions on this draft legislative act. I would also like to express satisfaction that after nearly 2 years of negotiations with the European Parliament, agreement on the European investigation order in criminal matters was finally reached. I believe that in this legal instrument, by means of common efforts, we are able to find a balance between investigation, concern and protection of human rights. Together, we have created a unified evidence-gathering system based on the mutual recognition principle, which should simplify and accelerate cooperation so extremely necessary for a successful criminal investigation. We would like to thank the rapporteur of the LIBE Committee, Nuno Melo, for constructive and benevolent cooperation in search for a common agreement on the text of this legal act. We hope that the directive will be adopted in the nearest future. During the Lithuanian presidency, we also started trilateral dialogue meetings on a proposal on a directive of the European Parliament and of the Council on criminal sanctions for insider dealing and market manipulation. During the presidency, intensive negotiations with the European Parliament took place. Work with the Council on a draft legislative act is being continued. We would like to express satisfaction at the major progress achieved by the negotiation during the presidency and to thank the ECOM and LIBE committee members for their efforts and constructivism in the search for common solutions. We hope that at the end of the Lithuanian presidency we will come to a common agreement on the main elements of the draft legislative act. During the presidency, we devoted much attention to the proposals of the Commission for creation of the European Union Agency for Criminal Justice and on the creation of the European Prosecutor's Office. The proposals were discussed in October during the Council of the Ministers of Justice, where the majority of the ministers supported the idea of setting up the European Public Prosecutor's Office. However, they emphasized that certain aspects of the proposal must be discussed further. I believe that within this short period of time since the presentation of the proposal, we have moved forward on the majority of issues discussed at the expert level, such as the structure and competencies of the future Public Prosecutor's Office. Even though it is too early to say that the future legal system will soon be completed, I believe that the overall image of some features of the future European Public Prosecutor's Office is gradually coming to life. Let me remind you that on September 16-17, together with the European Commission and the Academy of European Law, we organized a successful conference devoted to informal examination of the proposal. I believe that in future it will be necessary to take into consideration the opinions expressed by the national parliaments. This was also emphasized by the majority of ministers of justice during the Council in December. I consider the fact that the Commission also supports the position which it expressed in the communiqué of November 27 as a positive sign. With regard to the fact that the European Public Prosecutor's Office is created on the basis of Eurojust, we simultaneously analysed the proposal on the European Union Agency for Criminal Justice Cooperation, that is Eurojust. In the presence of a growing rate of cross-border crime, it is important to ensure the most efficient operation of Eurojust. Discussions in working groups on this issue were started in September by analysing the first 3 chapters of the regulations. We hope that the work performed will add to further negotiations on these proposals. Taking into consideration the fact that the Stockholm programme devotes special attention to the interests and needs of citizens of the European Union, and the fact that 2013 is the European Year of Citizens, throughout the presidency much attention was devoted to the protection of human rights, ensuring gender equality and equal opportunities, and diminishing of discrimination. In this context, I would like to express satisfaction with the final agreement we reached on the new financial programmes aiding implementation of these goals, that is the Justice Programme and the Rights, Equality and Citizenship Programme. We are happy that on November 5, the legislative institutions, the Council and the European Parliament, reached agreement on these two proposals. Extensive contributions were made through close cooperation of both legislative institutions, ensuring that the proposals be adopted before the end of the year. We are happy that on December 10 the proposals were approved during the plenary meeting of the European Parliament, and yesterday, that is the 16th of December, they were officially adopted in the Council. I would like to thank the European Parliament members, Rapporteur Kinga Göncz and Rapporteurs Luigi Berlinguer and Philip Claes, for constructive cooperation in achieving this result. In commemoration of the end of the European Year of Citizenship, the Council conclusions on the European Union Citizenship Report 2013 were approved. The conclusions emphasized the necessity to better inform the EU citizens of their rights and ensure that they are able to apply them in everyday life without facing unnecessary obstacles. These conclusions focus on the goals of elimination of obstacles for free movement of workers, students and trainees within the European Union, to protect vulnerable groups of European Union citizens, ensure accessibility of information and the opportunity for citizens to participate actively in the democratic processes, at the same time reducing bureaucratic procedures. Moreover, seeking to attract attention to the European citizenship and the Year of Citizens, a closing event of the European Year of Citizens was organized in Vilnius. The conference, How to Make Every Year a Year for Citizens, took place at the Lithuanian Parliament on December 12-13. The event summarized the work performed and the goals achieved related to the rights of the citizens of the European Union and provided future guidelines in this area. On the initiative of Lithuania, representatives of the non-governmental sector of the Eastern Partnership were invited to participate in the event as observers. This granted them an opportunity to observe the real situation of the European Union citizens, discussions among them, and to evaluate the perspectives of EU membership through this prism. We continued the work on the European Union's accession to the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms. During the period of Lithuanian presidency, the Commission submitted a request to the Court of Justice of the European Union asking for its opinion on the draft agreement of the EU accession to the European Convention for Human Rights. Encouraged by the majority of the member states, the presidency sent a letter to the Vice President of the European Commission, Viviane Reding, in which the Commission is asked to provide a consolidated version of the draft internal regulations. The Commission replied that it will provide an official proposal only after the Court provides its opinion. Despite this, the Council continued its work related to several separate elements of internal regulations. In December, too, the Council issued 2 groups of Council conclusions related to fundamental rights. The conclusions of the first group were directed at evaluation of the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights. The Presidency used these conclusions to contribute to the Commission's deliberation process before presenting proposals on amendments of the regulation establishing the Agency for Fundamental Rights. The work of the agency was evaluated positively. Conclusions were also provided on how to Our conclusions also provided recommendations on how to optimize agency operations and communication with the EU institutions and the Member States. The final conclusions of the Council, prepared on the initiative of the Presidency and agreed upon in December, are devoted to combating hate crimes in the European Union. These conclusions are aimed to increase awareness of hate crimes, encourage development of specific proposals for combating hate crime manifestations in the EU and the Member States. The conference, which the Presidency, together with the Agency of Fundamental Rights, held on November 12-13, laid down the foundation for these Council conclusions. The preamble of the Council conclusions includes a reference to the historic European memory and condemnation of all genocide crimes, crimes against humanity and war crimes, including crimes committed by totalitarian regimes. Moving on to the next goal of the Presidency, the creation of a growing Europe, let me emphasize that special attention was devoted to legislative measures that could contribute to the stimulation of economic growth. The data protection reform package is an important and complex initiative, the aim of which is a balance between ensuring human rights and promoting economic growth while responding to globalization and development of information technologies. The data protection reform package has been one of the central priorities of the Lithuanian Presidency. Continuing the work of our Irish colleagues, we worked very intensively on this issue both at the expert and political levels. The data protection reform package was analyzed by an expert group for the duration of more than 20 days. It was included in all agendas of the Councils of Justice and Home Affairs and was discussed at the informal meeting of the Ministers of Justice and Home Affairs in July in Vilnius. In December, the Council discussed one of the most important elements of the Commission proposal for a general data protection regulation, which is the so-called one-stop shop concept. Throughout the Presidency, we took into account the comments of the Member States and did our best trying to find a compromise. I would like to emphasize that every effort was made, especially after the October meeting of the Council of Ministers, to reach consensus on the one-stop shop model, as it is one of the main issues in the proposal that is still unresolved at the Council level. Even though especially intensive work was carried out in relation to this issue throughout the Presidency, the Ministers were unable to adopt final decisions on the essential elements of the proposed mechanism. Crucial legal issues were raised, especially the fact that seeking to ensure a one-stop shop for business would disproportionately aggravate the position of our citizens and undermine the protection of their fundamental rights. The Ministers, therefore, do not want to make any hasty decisions. We all agree that this data protection reform is necessary. However, due to the significance of this reform, it is essential to ensure the development of a high-quality regulation which would be valid for a long time, would have added value to the internal market, and would strengthen the competitive capacity of European Union companies. However, we cannot sacrifice protection of rights of our citizens. I believe that this issue will continue to be a priority issue on the agenda of our trio partner, the Greek Presidency, and that they will be able to reach a conclusion of this dossier as soon as possible, to which, without any doubt, the fact that the European Parliament already has the mandate to start dialogue with the Council will definitely be a valuable contribution. Last but definitely not least, the priority of the Presidency was creation of an open Europe. It is very important to show that despite current challenges, Europe remains open. During the past 6 months, we have been strengthening and developing cooperation with the countries of Eastern Partnership. In October, the first meeting of ministers responsible for justice and home affairs of the EU member states and the Eastern Partnership counterparts was held for the implementation of this priority. During the meeting, representatives of participating states adopted a joint declaration that provided specific steps towards closer cooperation in the area of justice and home affairs between the European Union and its partners. This first meeting was very important and beneficial both to the EU member states and the European partnership countries looking for deeper relationship with the EU. We hope that meetings of this kind will become a regular practice of close communication and cooperation. In July, I presented the priorities of the Lithuanian presidency of the Council of the European Union and said that the presidency might have to work on the issues not included into the agenda of the presidency, but which could become relevant. I'm talking here about the disclosed information on the U.S. National Security Agency intelligence collection program, which justly raises a number of complex and serious questions, especially due to their effect on the rights of EU citizens. We know and appreciate the fact that the European Parliament is concerned about the violations of EU citizens' privacy and announced an initiative providing more clearly on the alleged electronic mass surveillance of EU citizens. The Council also joined the dialogue with the US party, including the creation of the ad hoc EU-US working group on data protection. It is important to note that we see positive signs by the US with respect to European Union concerns, especially as it comes to unequal treatment of US and EU citizens. Let me emphasize that in response to multiple US requests to present proposals contributing to the discussions held in the United States on the United States surveillance policy reform, the document the contribution of EU and its member states in the context of review of the US surveillance programs was approved during the Council meeting in December. It was presented to the United States. It is important to continue the dialogue and then adequately evaluate the measures which could be applied. As the presidency, you also took into account that the Stockholm programme defining strategic guidelines for the areas of freedom, security and justice will end in 2014. Therefore, during the informal meeting of the Ministers of Justice and Home Affairs, which took place in July in Vilnius, we initiated political discussions on the outlook for justice and home affairs. Member states were also asked to present their proposals on the guidelines and main principles in the area of justice and internal affairs in writing. During the Lithuanian presidency, these discussions continued at the expert level, while ministers exchanged opinions during the meeting of the Council in December. During the presidency, we prepared a summary of the preliminary proposals of member states and will present the work done and the summary itself to Greece, the partner of the presidency trio, which will continue the aforementioned discussions. We hope that discussions underway in both the Council and the European Parliament will be a useful contribution to determining future strategic guidelines for developments in the area of freedom, security and justice. I would like to present in short the results of the initiatives contributing to the economic growth of Europe. The Council approved a common standpoint on the European Account Preservation Order. During the presidency, we continued intensive negotiations at the expert level on the proposal for a regulation on insolvency proceedings, and the Council succeeded in defining guidelines for further discussions in December. The Council approved a common standpoint on modifications of the Brussels I regulation, and the presidency country continued intensive and elaborate discussions on the Common European Sales Law instrument. Honourable members of the European Parliament, these are the main results in the area of justice of the Lithuanian presidency of the Council of the European Union. However, aside from the aforementioned priorities, we are also working on other dossiers and made maximum effort to ensure a successful presidency and tangible results. The past 6 months have been another phase and a memorable step in our common history, consolidating the relations, cooperation and unity of member states and institutions. On behalf of the presidency team, I would like once again to thank you all for your cooperation and assistance over the past months. I hope that with the end of the presidency, our cooperation and striving towards common goals will not end, but that the meaningful work will be continued by the partner of the presidency trio, Greece. Thank you, and I will look forward to your questions.
Clearly, that is a very comprehensive report on the presidency, but not quite complete yet, because I'm going to ask Mr. Barakauskas next to speak to us on his elements of this. Thank you.
Labą dieną visiems. Man labai malonu būti.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm extremely pleased to be today here. Thank you for coming to this meeting. And, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the floor. Honourable members of the European Parliament, members of the LIBE Committee, ladies and gentlemen, let me follow on the presentation of my colleague, the Minister of Justice of Lithuania, and deal with the work done in the field of home affairs. Before that, however, I'd like to thank most sincerely the European Parliament and especially this committee, our main committee in the Parliament, and all the rapporteurs of constructive and, which is most important, fruitful cooperation. It was really successful. Let me start with horizontal issues and specifically with the new multi-annual financial framework from 2014 to 2020. We have worked on 4 regulations in the area of home affairs. Our negotiations and trialogue agenda for the last 6 months has been intensive indeed, and the work is ongoing. I'm glad that we have reached agreement on both of the internal security-related financial measures and are nearing agreement on the remaining 2 regulations. Distinguished members of the LIBE Committee, I would like to hope very much that the last agreements on these documents are reached already this week. This will ensure that there will be no obstacles and delays to financing of home affairs from the beginning of next year. As mentioned by my colleague, following the conclusions of the European Council, we have initiated political discussions on the strategic guidelines for further development of the EU policy in JHA area. Without repeating what has been achieved, let me just say that most of the member states see an imperative need to align the future political program with the financing cycle. Besides, in setting out the strategic political priorities in this area, a special role and contribution of the European Parliament needs to be recognized. It is obvious that the strategic guidelines in the area of JHA to be adopted by the European Council in June next year will have to reflect the common position of the Council, the European Parliament, and the Commission. One of the main priorities for the Lithuanian presidency in creating an open, credible, and growing Europe was the effective management and protection of EU's external borders. And with this view, we have devoted considerable attention to the deliberations on the Smart Borders legislative package. External border management should ensure simple and effective border crossing and create favourable conditions to third country nationals. At the same time, the control of external borders must be an effective tool for the fight against various forms of crime, such as terrorism, illegal migration, and cross-border crime and must contribute to the overall internal security in the EU. The Frontiers Working Party in the Council has concluded the first reading of the proposal for arrivals and departures systems. Therefore, the incoming presidency will be able to continue this work on the basis of the updated text. The Council has also moved on with the examination of yet another document in the package, the initiative on the Registered Travellers Programme. We will be handing over the remaining issues to our trio partners from Greece. Another very important legislative initiative in the area of frontiers is the regulation establishing the rules for the surveillance of the external sea borders in the context of operational cooperation coordinated by Frontex. This regulation must become an effective tool, especially when it comes to the improvement of the situation in the Mediterranean region. I am delighted that the Presidency succeeded in finding agreement on the common approach at last week's Coreper II. It resulted in the mandate for negotiations with the EP, and I am happy to note that the first informal trialogue meeting took place already today. I hope that the compromise on this proposal can be found smoothly and without delay. In this context, let me also mention that in order to avoid the tragedies like the one that we recently saw near the island of Lampedusa should happen again, we have, together with the European Commission, established a task force for the Mediterranean. As instructed by the European Council of the 24th and 25th of October, the task force has carried out a comprehensive analysis of the causes of the tragedy and has put forward an immediate action plan to manage and improve the situation. We hope that the European Council this week will also approve this action plan. Another priority under our presidency was legislative efforts related to legal migrations. We are pleased to have reached an agreement on the Seasonal Workers Directive. Its implementation will not only prevent the exploitation of these workers in the EU, but will also provide incentives and safeguards so that their temporary stay does not turn into a permanent one. We have made considerable progress also in the negotiations on the Intra-Corporate Transferees Directive. I personally hope that progress achieved will provide good grounds for the Hellenic presidency to continue the work and find agreement on this document. Highly qualified workers can contribute considerably to the economic and social growth of the whole of the European Union. The proposal for the Students and Researchers Directive is very complex and encompasses a number of different areas of public life. Therefore, there is a need to continue the discussions on some of the directive's provisions in the Council. During our presidency, we also continued work in search for response to migratory pressures experienced by member states. The Council focused its efforts on the issues of Syrian refugees and Lampedusa. We also continued migration-related dialogues with third countries. The negotiations on mobility partnership with Tunisia have been completed, and a joint declaration on mobility partnership with Azerbaijan was signed during the JHA Council a few days ago. With regard to Schengen issues, I would like to mention 2 points. The December JHA Council, at the initiative of the Lithuanian presidency, adopted its conclusions related to the alerts in accordance with Article 26 of the Regulation 1987/2006 on the second generation Schengen Information System, the so-called SIS-2. The implementation of these conclusions will improve the quality of data uploaded into the system and will ensure a more effective application of political sanctions restricting the movement of third country nationals into the Schengen area. The Council also came back to, in our view, a very important issue of full-fledged application of the Schengen acquis with regards to Bulgaria and Romania. Taking into account the majority view in the Council, Lithuania proposed to discuss the possibilities to expand the Schengen area on the basis of gradual removal of border controls. Regrettably, I have to say that with the December Council approaching, it became clear that a unanimous position needed for this type of decision could still not be reached at that stage. After the deliberations on this issue, a joint Romanian and Bulgarian declaration was included in the minutes of the Council, and the Council conclusion stated its readiness to return to the issue in the near future and to discuss possibilities to resolve it through a two-step approach. Let me now move to issues of internal security and the fight against terrorism. After intensive discussions of the draft Europol regulations, we concluded the first reading and came up with compromise text of some of the most important chapters of this regulation. This text will serve as a good basis for further discussions. Most of the member states in the Council expressed their view as early as June this year that the Commission's proposal to merge Europol and CEPOL was not grounded enough and invited the Commission to review its proposal. The Council did not come back to the issue and decided not to discuss the regulation's provisions dealing with the merger and training matters. Still, let me say a couple of words on CEPOL separately. As you know, the United Kingdom has made a decision not to renew from 2014 the contract with regard to CEPOL's headquarters in Bramshill. The Lithuanian presidency, therefore, had to react swiftly to this situation and look for possible solutions that would ensure the continuity of CEPOL activities. The JHA Council of October the 8th came to a common agreement of member states that after CEPOL moves from Bramshill, its headquarters is to be established in Budapest, Hungary. I've been told that my Hungarian colleague, Minister of Home Affairs, yesterday presented to you comprehensive information on this issue and of the possibility of moving the CEPOL headquarters to Budapest. On the basis of this agreement, 25 member states put forward a legislative initiative on November the 13th with a proposal to amend Article 4 of the Council decision on CEPOL. As you know, this draft proposal will have to be adopted by a joint Council and Parliament decision. I sincerely believe that ensuring continuous functioning of the CEPOL is in our common interest. Distinguished members of the committee, I trust in constructive cooperation between the Council and the Parliament and hope that the agreement on this issue will be reached in April next year at the latest. Another legislative proposal that is important for most of the member states is the so-called PNR directive. PNR data is of special importance in the fight against terrorism and serious crime, ensuring effective prevention. More and more member states, therefore, have started their own PNR systems. It is obvious that we need consistent EU-level regulation here that would ensure effective police cooperation and establish adequate data protection measures. I hope that these circumstances will be duly taken into consideration before negotiations start on this important initiative. A few words now about cyber security. During its presidency, Lithuania attached a lot of attention to cybersecurity and fight against crimes in the cyberspace. The Council has agreed on the monitoring mechanism to control cybersecurity measures. We have dealt with cybersecurity in more than one event during our presidency and discussed the issue in bilateral talks with our strategic partners. In the area of the fight against terrorism, at the beginning of December, the Council discussed the problem of the so-called foreign fighters and returning persons, especially in the context of Syria. The Council decided that the actions in this area should focus first of all on prevention, information exchange, establishment of routes, criminal justice and cooperation with third countries. I'd like to emphasize that the Council has clearly stated that in order to detect and monitor the routes of foreign fighters, priority should be given to the creation of an efficient PNR system and effective use of the existing PNR systems, and also to second-generation Schengen information system. Mr. Chairman, LIBE Committee members, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention and constructive cooperation throughout our presidency. I have felt a lot of support from you. We had the pleasure of seeing you in Vilnius. My colleague Justice Minister and I are now ready to listen to your comments and answer your questions. Thank you very much once again.
Well, again, I'm very grateful to you for that synopsis. I've got several names on my sheet asking questions here this afternoon. So could I ask my colleagues, we only have about half an hour, if you could keep your questions or comments fairly short and allow the ministers an opportunity to respond. May I suggest that I take some questions first and then we'll have a response at the end, if that would be convenient to my guests here. Okay, thank you. So first of all on my list is Madame Flotre. Please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors...
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, I have 3 questions I wanted to put. The first was on CIA secret detainment on European soil, extraordinary rendition. I just wondered whether we couldn't take the opportunity of your presidency. Couldn't the EU take decisive steps to ensure that there is justice and we reveal the truth about this programme? You haven't grasped that opportunity as a country, as Lithuania, nor as the presidency. Now, Poland was heard before the Court of Human Rights, and I think you know that that's likely to happen to you too. 2 appeals have been made to the Court of Human Rights against your country. Now, the Polish president said if a CIA agent treats somebody brutally in a Warsaw hotel, the hotel people should be responsible for what happens. Now, that is a recognition of the facts, but it isn't a recognition of responsibility or liability for the things that have happened on Polish soil. Is that your position as well in Lithuania? Secondly, the Lithuanian Parliament introduced administrative sanctions for people who denigrated moral values and to penalise public events which you say contravene rules of morality. What are you thinking about there? One presumes you're talking about LGBT persons. Was that the intention of what you've said there in that text? If not, what were you talking about? And finally, you said that the mandate hasn't been completed on data protection. A colleague, Albrecht, is very, very disappointed in this. because it's very, very difficult to make progress in negotiations at a speedy pace with Council. It's absolutely vital that we make progress on data protection to protect people's fundamental rights in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Romero Lopez, next, please.
Gracias, presidente. Querría al primer ministro.
Thank you very much. To the Lithuanian Minister of Justice, thank you for that information, and I'd like to thank you for what you have achieved during the Lithuanian presidency. But I'd also like to say it's unfortunate that you haven't been able to wrap up the data protection package and complete that. I would like to say that the Parliament has done everything it could to ensure that it was possible to approve the data protection package during this mandate. Unfortunately, we faced a very hard-line position from Council on this. I'd just like to know exactly why the Lithuanian presidency has not been able to complete the data protection package. It is so important. You talked about passenger name records, PNR. I know you've insisted on that. And yet, you haven't been able to do your job. You haven't completed the data protection package. And as long as you haven't finished that, until you've finished it, we will still have this hanging over us. And the Parliament feels that this is still an outstanding issue that needs to be sorted out in our mandate. Please tell us why this has got bogged down. And to the Home Affairs Minister, you have a working party on the Mediterranean and you're launching an action plan there. Could you give us a clue about what this action plan is going to involve? What is the EU going to do in this working party on the Mediterranean? How are you going to solve the problem of the terrible things that are happening, for example, in Lampedusa? And then there's the mobility agreement with Tunisia. I wonder if you could talk about that.
Thank you. And now, Frau Sippel. Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, in the presentations, most notably in Mr. Bernatonis' introduction, I heard a great deal about the economy. I heard a great deal about criminal prosecution, little about fundamental rights and the protection of democracy. And to be frank, I am wondering what is going on in the European Union and indeed in our member states. Maybe there are 4 points I could raise, if I may. First of all, hate crimes. You address those, and rightly so. However, I'm just wondering, and this is a question not specifically to you as President in Office of the Council, but as a member of the Council, I wonder whether right-wing extremists and extreme populist parties are seeing themselves justified in their role if, for example, a German interior minister has ideas which are completely distorted and images which are distorted about how Roma are all creeping into our society and they should all be sent back. And that in some municipalities in Romania, Bulgaria and Hungary, there are no legal obstacles, but practical segregation, if you like, exclusion of Roma to prevent them have access to living areas, to residence, to employment, and looking at the area we're working in here, and in conjunction with the rights of minorities, such as in Croatia and elsewhere, how come these problems are cropping up? My question to you is, what is the Council doing when these sort of reports come to the fore? Secondly, on criminal prosecution, in recent years, and you mentioned that you've done this during your presidency as well, a great deal has been set in train to simplify criminal prosecution. But we haven't set a great deal in train when it comes to simplification on the other side of the legal framework, if you like, i.e. the rights of defence, procedural rights for those who stand accused. And I get angry every single time when we discuss this sort of thing, and you mentioned this, smart borders, for example. We're quite happy to throw a load of money at that. However, when you turn things around and talk about procedural rights and I think in future we'll have the debate on legal aid and other similar issues, that suddenly we're presented with the crisis, the problems with budget lines, and that unfortunately there's no more that we can do. I find it particularly remarkable, and this is my third point, on data protection. You don't want to take any over-hasty decisions. Well, I'm a bit nonplussed there, because I assume that the Council surely should be at the fore of looking at what the Commission's proposing, and as the Council and as individual Member States, they must be involved in what is going on there. They must have discussed this, at least as long as the Parliament has discussed this. And what we see coming of that is that there's no novelty in the discussion. Again and again, it's harping back to old debates by individuals. And I think when it comes down to it, we as the European Union should be providing a model example. I get the impression that our friends on the other side of the Atlantic, in the US, they're laughing their socks off. There's more discussion on effective data protection over there than here. And I don't think we should draw things out at any greater length. We should press on to reach a decent decision and make sure that things that have been set in train can be implemented once and for all. And this brings me on to my last point of the NSA, obviously. You said that there are concerns in Europe over this. Well, dear Minister, the issue is not necessarily restricted to what the US Secret Services are doing. We have to reflect on what is happening in our very midst, that European governments and their secret services are doing, the way that they are trampling on citizens' rights. And if we don't pick that up and champion that, and this leads me to my question, then how are we going to have discussions on how we can develop clear rules on secret services? Do these rules exist? Are they being drawn up or not? The question of these clear rules, data protection, rights and possibilities for secret services, these, I think, are inextricably linked with the status the rule of law and democracy enjoys in Europe. And to conclude, I have to say, in all sincerity, that I am worried about the path that we appear to be on, that at one another juncture we could see a few additional positive things to help us out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Herr Weber.
Ja, Herr Vorsitzender, liebe
Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, Presidency in Office, I'm a member of the EPP group. We're in a group then that is certainly strongly in favour of internal security. We want to see PNR at European level. We want strong border protection. I think the EPP chimes in well with what the Council's set out in its compromises. But I've heard over the past recent weeks some information that has really angered me somewhat. And it's something that concerns citizens' data protection and the way we deal with our American friends. We've seen the Snowden revelations. Everybody's got that in the backs of their minds. And above all, once it was made public that espionage has been carried out against states of the European Union by the American authorities, the pressure on the US in Washington was great to accommodate some of Europe's demands. Commissioner Reding, together with you, the Presidency in Office, had discussions in Washington. We were there as well. It was talking about the framework agreement on data protection that we're pressing for, that the European Union wants to negotiate on with the US. We've really been stuck and bogged down for a couple of years on that. And we understand the Americans have their concerns, but we have a possibility here where we could really, with the cards in our hand, force the Americans' hand. And I think Commissioner Reding was on the ball there, but unfortunately the Presidency in Office of Council, in their discussions with the US, claimed that we weren't actually that interested in that. So there was a split in the European position. And I just wanted to express the point here that I am very satisfied with a great deal of what you're doing as Presidency and what you've done. I'm very pleased, and thank you for that. However, as a member of the European Parliament, when we are trying to present a common face to the outside world, we speak with forked tongue. So I think we need to exploit the position, work on the US authorities. We have to be creative and put forward a very strong line from the European side, and I would urge you in Council that you do that in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bronze.
Thank you. Mr. Bernatonis mentioned specific proposals on what he called hate crime. The approach so far has been to create a list of recognised categories of victims of such crime, people defined by ethnicity, by sex or gender, by disability, by sexual orientation, and so on. Has the Council, or indeed anybody else, considered the possibility of creating a single concept of hate crime against people of all categories, however defined, including, say, people defined by political opinion, affiliation or ideology? Or would that lead to the wrong people being prosecuted? And, of course, that would never do. Thank you.
I'm going to ask our visitors to reply in just a second. If I may just take advantage of my position and just ask a question myself. If I could just ask them, they did touch on the issue of EU PNR, but bearing in mind the present position and the progress by France with its own system and the granting of funding for 12 other defined EU member states, increasing concerns, which I know there are, over foreign fighters, and the lack of clear legal framework for the airlines across the whole of Europe. Does this presidency still see at the end of its term the EU PNR system as a priority for the future? And is there anything else they'd like to add? But that's my question, but you've got all the questions, gentlemen. I don't know who's going to begin on these replies. Who would like to do so? Would it be Mr. Bernatonis, perhaps? Yeah? Thank you.
Dėkuoju už klausimus.
Thank you very much for the questions. There was quite a number of questions, and all of them are really relevant. I will try to give an answer to each of them. First of all, Mr. Flood, a question concerning the detention centres, secret detention centres. We are of the opinion that each state should be responsible for any human rights violations. Therefore, just the alleged, just allegations should be either denied or accepted, but it should be done on the basis of documents. We believe that the responsibility of the state should be applied based on the legal acts. During the presidency, Lithuania was observed position that was presented. Lithuanian Vice Minister of the Interior that the Council cannot take an action related to the resolution accepted by the Council, but it encourages member states to follow the provisions of the international treaties and protect the rights of the refugees. Lithuania is the only state that has carried out the extensive investigation on the possible detention centers and the transfer of persons. And it has been established that there have never been any secret detention centers in Lithuania. And when we hear just request that we should accept the existence of such centers, we cannot do this. Concerning another question concerning the alleged administrative sanctions, well, I believe the questions relate to both the situation in our country and the presidency. Concerning administrative sanctions, now any in other
prieš pusmetį.
LGBT question. As I was presenting the program of our presidency and said that the LGBT event was not going to take place, but all those who participated just know that it did happen. And when we speak about some administrative sanctions, this is not true. Please come over to Lithuania, and I, as the Minister of Justice, will provide to you all the liabilities and responsibilities that we follow. But I, as a minister, cannot really agree to such.
Buvo vienas iš prioritetų. Mes skyrėme 20
speeches. Now, 20 days were spent in the working group on the issue. Both councils discussed it in October and December, and also during the informal meeting of the ministers in Vilnius. But in the December Council, new legal aspects came up. The legal service came up with these issues. I believe you know about them, and I believe you could understand why member states could not take a decision to approve it, because most of us noticed that there was no balance between business interests and protection of human rights. Therefore, I quite agree with the Parliament members who spoke about protection of personal data, protecting human rights. That is why the decision was not taken in December, because some ministers were not sure whether by this human rights would be protected. I believe that the discussions that were carried on data protection provided all the possibilities to complete all the discussions. At least the Minister of Greece is of the same opinion. We have to perhaps introduce certain modifications in the proposals. I believe that this is understanding of both the LIBE Committee and our committee concerning the protection of fundamental rights. The Council had given a lot of attention to it. If you participated in Vilnius conference organized by the Lithuanian presidency together with the Fundamental Rights Agency in Vienna. It was really a very good event where various aspects of hate crimes were discussed. Hate crimes that were related to Roma people, to sexual minorities and other issues. The conference was evaluated as a very positive event. Then the Council in December approved the report on hate crime in the European Union. Conclusions were adopted concerning combating hate crimes, and a common position was expressed. So I wouldn't like to agree with the opinion that nothing has been done on the issues. Perhaps there was too little information. But as I've said, we're always ready to provide all the necessary information to you if asked.
Labai ačiū, pirmininkė.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will try and answer you, Madam Romero. for your very important question. As to the EU actions in the Mediterranean, we saw a huge tragedy taking place, and you asked me what were the results of the task force for the Mediterranean, and also you wanted me to present my opinion whether the measures proposed by the EU will be enough to prevent another tragedy. As you may know, the Task Force for the Mediterranean established after the invitation from the European Council analyzed the situation and decided that immediate measures were needed to control and improve the situation. The task force already had 2 meetings, and the results of these discussions were published in the communiqué drafted by the Commission. This communiqué was then presented to the Council, where it was found to be very topical and effective. First of all, the Council believes that the mechanisms of rescue at sea must be strengthened and made more effective. The Council also emphasized that actions must be coordinated on the EU level and should not be undertaken by individual member states, especially when dealing with third countries in the Mediterranean region. It was decided that the Frontex possibilities and the possibilities of the European Refugee Agency must be used more effectively. I already mentioned the need to strengthen the cooperation with the third countries, especially the countries of origin and transit. Solidarity with countries that feel most of the migration pressures must also be strengthened. It is also necessary to strengthen the role of Europol, especially in dealing with illegal trade and organized crime. I have tried very quickly to enumerate what the various formations of the Council have managed to achieve in this area. Thank you for your question.
Taip, ir dar vienas buvo klausimas, tai gerbiam.
Yes, indeed. We also heard a question from our distinguished chairman. It goes without saying, Mr. Chairman, that this tool is absolutely necessary to us. Therefore, the Lithuanian presidency, and let me emphasize, we were especially pleased to hear that the decision was made in the European Parliament to continue work on the directive regulating the PNR data. We have collected all the information from the countries where the PNR systems are already active. We have sent this information to the Council, and I hope that the Council will manage to take all the necessary decisions on the issue. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for not only for your synopsis, your comprehensive reports, but also in dealing with our questions. And can I not only thank you very much for the work that you have done during the presidency in the JHA field, but may I also take this opportunity of wishing you a very happy Christmas and a prosperous and healthy new year, both for yourselves and, of course, for the people of Lithuania as a whole. So thank you very much. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, I can probably, at this point, adjourn the meeting. Only thing I wanted just to mention, if the gentlemen don't mind, I don't think I have any other recorded business here, but the next meetings will be, I think it's right in saying on the...
We stop and we resume it.
Oh, my goodness, yes, sorry. I beg your pardon. The LIBE Committee Inquiry in electronic mass surveillance will resume at 1700 hours in this room. And then, of course, the committee will also reassemble on the 18th, tomorrow, at 9 o'clock in Jan 2Q2. So the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Happy Christmas for you. check when you speak to them if they get it in Portuguese, but afterwards, if you could start us on
Colleagues, we'll make a start. Please accept my apologies for the late start, and thank you for your presence. I know we're going to be joined by other members who are coming shortly, but thank you for being here on time. And again, my apologies for the slightly late start, particularly to those who are online as well. The presentation of the working document, Scope of International, European and National Security in the EU Perspective, which is going to be authored by myself and Mr. Kirkhope, will be slightly delayed. It's not going to take place at 11 a.m. tomorrow. And if there are no objections, the rest of the agenda for today and tomorrow is adopted. No objections, that's fine. For the language profile of the inquiry meeting today, there's going to be no Finnish, Estonian, Maltese and Croatian languages available. And the usual apology for that. Okay, so let's begin the video conference. And again, my apologies to colleagues who have been waiting patiently at the other end. We're going to have statements by Ms. Vanessa Graziotan, Chair of the Parliamentary Committee of Inquiry on Espionage, and Mr. Ricardo de Rezende Faracao, Rapporteur of the Parliamentary Committee of Inquiry on Espionage. And I think we can go straight over to them. They're ready to... I'm just going to say a few words. This bit. Okay. Colleagues, I'm just going to, before you begin, just to, by way of introduction, in the session we're going to hear both representatives who are from the Federal Senate of Brazil. As you know, following the revelations of systematic surveillance of telecommunications and emails of Brazilian President Rousseff and of members of the government as well as of major Brazilian companies, the Brazilian Senate decided to set up a parliamentary inquiry committee on espionage. This Senate committee decided on 25th of September 2013 to approach the European Parliament to have information on the activities of our own LIBE Committee Inquiry. President Schulz and myself have written to the chairs of the Senate and of the Inquiry Committee. And today we will hear finally, by video conference, the President of the Parliamentary Inquiry Committee on Espionage, Mr. Graziotan, and the Rapporteur of this inquiry, Mr. de Rezende Faracao. I'm very happy to welcome you both via the video conference. This is a great opportunity for our committee to exchange views with you. And first of all, to Mr. Graziotan, you have the floor.
It seems to be Mr. de Rezende.
Right, okay, we don't have you. We have Mr. de Rezende Faracao. And the floor is yours.
Na condição de relator da comissão de investigação no...
I'm the rapporteur of the committee, the Parliamentary Committee of Inquiry. We're going to be taking part in this video conference. In a few moments, Mrs. Graziotin, who's the chair of the inquiry, will be with us. The interpreters would just like to point out the sound is very bad. My first words would be words of thanks for the opportunity that you, Claude Moraes, have given us to take part in this and talk to you in the European Parliament's committee. We think it's very important to have this exchange of views and impressions and join in with this joint effort, a common effort being made by my country, our Parliament, and your European Parliament. We're investigating this situation. We're trying to work out how we can study ways in which we can give information to our nation, to the national states, and to our public, and ensure that there is security for their communications, and they are afforded privacy. Privacy not just for individual persons in their daily lives, but also our businesses, and protect any strategic information. The strategies of the states of Brazil. I think we were all shocked, surprised and perplexed at the revelations of Mr. Snowden. In September, we began the work of the Parliamentary Committee of Inquiry to investigate all the facts that have been reported. And over these months, we've held a whole series of hearings. The executive has the priority here and the prerogative to investigate these matters. And this allows us to take the initiative to try to ensure that we have a national policy, a national approach on this phenomenon, which is obviously a very worrying phenomenon these days, of cybercrime and anything which will interfere with people's communications. Now we are working towards the end of the work of the Parliamentary Committee of Inquiry. And we are obviously nearing the end as we have come into December 2013. We felt we should extend the deadline, the original deadline, so that we could investigate further and we could continue this dialogue with the European Parliament and try and increase our contact with you and work with you in symmetry. We would like to look with you at the targets of your inquiries in the European Parliament. There have been violations of communications by the NSA, by the United States. National telecommunications being interfered with, and that's what's happened in Brazil as well. We'd very much like to work with the European Parliament on this, so that we do react in a similar way, so that we can converge on what we say. I think we really need to set limits on this kind of access. Everybody has been shocked by the revelations of Mr. Snowden. Our President, Dilma Rousseff, has already spoken on behalf of the Brazilian people on this matter before the General Assembly at the United Nations. She protested on behalf of the Brazilian people about this invasion of their privacy. But we're still studying all the data. We're still working out how we can improve our legislative framework so that we can deal with this. And we are ensuring that there are executive powers for the Brazilian government. We have to try to ensure that we can enhance the level of protection. As I say, not just in terms of invasion of privacy for individual persons, but information which might be absolutely vital, strategic information for the Brazilian state. So the whole point about this conversation, this video conference, is to express our desire to work with you. We know you're working on these matters in the European Parliament, and we very much that our inquiry reports could be on the same track. And we hope, for example, that at the beginning of February we could actually meet in person. Our chair, Vanessa Graciotin, and I would very much like to have a joint session with you in the European Parliament. That way we could tell you about our report and see what we've discovered, what our decisions have been. And that will give us an opportunity to have access to what you've been doing. As I say, we would like to react en bloc with you. Our proposal is too that this should be extended to other countries who feel the same way as Brazil about this. In Mercosur, for example, in December and January, Mercosur and the European Union are completing work on the agreement which we've been negotiating on with the European Union. So it would be very good if we could combine the timing there with those meetings of Mercosur. And we could have a meeting in Brazil, or we could have a meeting with you in the European Union, over in Europe, so that we can work very intensively on this with you and see whether our conclusions could tally a bit more with what you're doing. So that would be my initial statement at this video conference. As I say, what's important to us is that we can be in tune with what you're doing in the European Parliament in this inquiry. Now, there is something new I need to report. Edward Snowden has published a letter in all the big newspapers, particularly the Folha de São Paulo. He sent an open letter to the Brazilian people. And in that letter, he has expressed his satisfaction with what Brazil has been doing. Now, implicitly, he has said that he would very much like to cooperate with the senators in the Brazilian Parliament who are carrying out this investigation, this inquiry. But he is concerned about political asylum. At the moment he has temporary asylum from Russia, but it is temporary asylum. So he is more or less suggesting that he would like to ask for political asylum in Brazil, and that he would contribute in detail, giving detailed facts, the kind of facts that he has been revealing to the world. The revelations of Mr. Snowden have been very important. They are of transcendental importance. And he's talking about us clawing back values and principles which should be guiding our societies, particularly our allies, countries that should be our allies. Now, it is the President of the Republic who has the prerogative to grant asylum. Of course, it's not within our powers. But the Foreign Affairs Committee has been supporting the idea of granting asylum to Edward Snowden. This is a window of opportunity, certainly, to try and find out a little bit more and get rather more in-depth information about the situation. So I'm now going to give the floor to our chairman, the chairman of the Parliamentary Committee of Inquiry, Vanessa Graziutin. She's guided our work here, and I'd just like to send my greetings to you, Claude Moraes, and all our colleagues, and we pass on greetings from our Senate colleagues. Once again, we are very keen on working with you. We're absolutely determined that we should work with you and try to draw similar conclusions in our reports, so that we do have a reaction from the European Parliament and from the Brazilian Parliament, plus improving the legal framework, trying to make sure that our countries, our societies can learn how to cope with this type of invasion of privacy. So that's all I wanted to say, and I'd now like to give the floor to Senator Vanessa Graziutin, who is, as I said, the chair of our Parliamentary Committee of Inquiry. We are working on this through to February, and we're certainly going to ensure that we provide you with detailed information. And we're very interested to hear what you're doing in terms of improving the legal framework. And we're working on this both with the Brazilian Parliament, with the Mercosur countries, and with the European Parliament. Vanessa Graziutin. Good afternoon. It's afternoon here. I'd like to say hello to everybody taking part in the video conference over in Brussels. And we have people here from the National Parliament, our Federal National Parliament. and our dear friend, the rapporteur, Ricardo de Rezende Ferraço. He has put a lot of time into this inquiry, and he's also a very important figure, for he's chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. I would just like to say that we're absolutely delighted to be able to exchange views with you, so that the Senate Committee and the LIBE Committee of the European Parliament can exchange information. We did ask for information, and we did ask that you send us a summary of the report that you are doing. And looking at your documents, looking at the details that you sent us, it's pretty clear to us that our objectives are very, very similar to the objectives that you have over there in the European Union. Looking at the historical record of what you intend to examine, what you intend to study, as I say, it rings a lot of bells. It's with us in terms of what we're trying to do here in Brazil. And you're dealing very effectively with how you deal with businesses and protection of the internet there. You've got far ahead of us. You're very advanced in this area. So that's one other reason why it's very useful for us and very important to hear all the work that the European Parliament has done on this. We are concerned, of course, about us all being spied upon. People seem to be watching everything we're doing. That's citizens, businesses, big businesses, even the state, even heads of state, because our president, Dilma Rousseff herself, was apparently the victim of bugging, of interception of telecommunications on her mobile phone. So clearly, we need to be able to protect our territory, our national territory, and our people's telecommunications. So we have to defend the state, we have to defend our citizens and our telecommunications. And so we are to make a number of suggestions. So this meeting is very timely. You've just heard from Ricardo that Edward Snowden's letter has been published, an open letter to the Brazilian people. He hasn't made a formal application for permanent asylum, but it looks like he wishes to be granted asylum by Brazil. I don't know what Ricardo's told you, but the Foreign Affairs Committee has put a formal motion on this, and suggesting that we could grant asylum to Edward Snowden. Now, this asylum request cannot be seen as something linked to this investigation. It's a matter of a particular person. Brazil will or will not grant asylum to a particular person on the grounds put forward in his asylum application, if he puts one in. But it's separate from the Parliamentary Committee of Inquiry. It isn't an exchange. It isn't an exchange in terms of if you help us, we'll help you with this Committee of Inquiry. His asylum application has to be dealt with separately. But obviously, we have to be aware of the feeling of insecurity throughout the world. The work we're doing here is very important. We hope we'll be able to have a more detailed in-depth meeting with you in February. The Brazilian government is organizing a conference in April next year. This will be a world conference, a global conference on the internet. President Hollande was recently in our country, and it's very important that we coordinate on this international conference. The idea being to discuss a whole series of issues related to governance and the internet. We need a new model for dealing with the internet. It has to be a democratic and open model but we have to be aware of the fundamental rights of persons, the right to privacy above all things. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you too for the correspondence we're having, receiving information from you. I'm afraid we haven't been able to meet you personally today, but we hope that we will be able to do so soon. In December, we're very busy in the Senate. We're voting through the budget and other matters, so we couldn't be there with you. But we very much hope to meet you in February. Could I just add something? Perhaps I could take this opportunity to address Claude Moraes on this. In 2001, the Parliament, the European Parliament, investigated interceptions then, interception of telecommunications. Perhaps you could tell us about those inquiries back then and the inquiries now, the investigation underway now. What's the difference? What's happened since then? What new facts, what new events have you been noticing in this present crisis compared to past investigations of such activities?
Okay, thank you very much to both of you, to Ms. Grazia-Tin and Mr. de Rezende Ferrasar. Have I pronounced those names reasonably correctly? Can you hear me okay? Because you were complaining earlier that the sound was not very good. Can you hear me okay? You can.
Muito bem.
Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you very well. Yep.
Don't take the fact that I've got a Portuguese surname that I can speak any Portuguese. Okay, I can actually speak. I can understand a tiny bit, just a little bit. You're acting, first of all, as a rapporteur because you're asking me questions about Echelon. That you can't ask me questions. We have to ask. We have to now get responses from all of our colleagues here. But thank you, first of all, for the very detailed and excellent contributions that you have both made. It's obvious already that there's so much symmetry between your Committee of Inquiry and ours, and there's so much in common. And first of all, I'd like to say that it's a very positive indication you've given us of a meeting in February. I think we can certainly do this because while there are some differences between our inquiries, we have quite a lot in common. So I think in February we could probably do a meeting and we could probably compare what we're doing. I'm chairing this meeting, but I'm also the rapporteur, and I'd like to say one or two things about Echelon and answer your question about what happened in 2001. One of the key points, of course, was that many of the recommendations of Echelon were not implemented. It was an excellent report, and I hope that in February, once we launch our report, some of the substantive recommendations are implemented. But let me first of all, just by way of introduction, for my own questions, if I may just ask you two introductory questions, and I think we have time to perhaps take, say, 3 questions at a time and then put them to both of you. And then perhaps you could answer those 3 questions at a time. You think that's okay? Okay, let me begin with my questions. Given that there are so many similarities between our inquiries, I wanted to first of all ask something prompted by your evidence that interested me. We've had now so many inquiry meetings, and we're coming to the conclusion, I think, rapidly, that we're not going to get a situation where EU citizens are going to get the kind of legal redress from the United States that we really want. And I understand that you have been calling for this kind of approach as well. So what is your understanding of where your inquiry is going in terms of how Brazilian citizens see their own view of legal redress in relation to the United States? How do non-US citizens get their justice? I mean, what is your view of this? The second thing I'm quite interested in is this whole issue of the the UN Framework Resolution on the Right to Privacy in the Digital Age, which was launched by both you and Germany in the UN. I mean, this was of great interest to us. It's something that, is quite interesting in terms of its politics. Where is this going, and what sort of political effect has it had, both for you in Brazil, and how have you dealt with this in your inquiry? Those are my two questions, and I'm now going to ask Ana Gomes. Don't worry, this whole inquiry is not populated by Portuguese members, but the next one is also has also got a Portuguese name. I'm going to hand the floor to Ana Gomes, who is a member of our Foreign Affairs Committee. Ana.
Bom dia.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon to our colleagues over in Brazil. I just wanted to take this opportunity to ask you a question. In your Senate inquiry, what are you actually looking at when you talk about judicial redress and administrative redress? Here, we have reached the conclusion that in American law, there is no option available for non-US citizens to get administrative or judicial redress if they end up in a situation where their data have been misused. For example, where people have taken their data when they're and they say it's to do with combating terrorism. People don't have any right to redress, administrative or judicial redress. We're talking to our American colleagues in Congress, in the US Congress, and we're saying this is essential. Essential if we're to re-establish an atmosphere of trust, of mutual trust. What we need is the kind of data protection system which will correspond to our standards here in Europe, protection of privacy and our citizens' fundamental rights. Now, it seems to be very difficult to get our American colleagues to understand what we're talking about. Today we were in touch with a delegation from the US Congress with Mike Rogers chairing that delegation, leading that delegation here, and they seem just not to get it. They don't seem to understand what we're talking about. So I'd like to know what you're doing in this area, whether you too have this kind of difficulty dealing with the Americans. What are you doing in the talks you have with the Americans in terms of agreements on fighting terrorism, when you're talking about the transfer of personal data to combat terrorism? What are you doing when you talk to the Americans about PNR, passenger name records? I'm sure that your airlines are asked for passenger names and information just as our airlines are. So that's what I want to know from you. Is this the kind of area you're talking to the Americans about? Because I think we need to join forces because we're having difficulty with that as well, as our colleague has said.
Okay, and the third and final question in this round for both of you comes from Ms. Birgit Sippel, who's a German member of the LIBE Committee, the Justice and Home Affairs Committee. Birgit.
I hope it will be a good question that I put. Okay. First of all, I'm very happy to have this video conference because it's helpful even for our work here in European Parliament to see that debates on all the revelations of Edward Snowden are taking place not only in Europe, maybe not only in the United States, but even in other places in the world, so that a cooperation may be very welcome. If I understood correctly, it's a similar situation in Brazil like we have it here. You have not yet finalized your work in the Committee of Inquiry, but I would like to know in which areas you are thinking about to work on when you come to conclusions. Is it more that you think about new rules or even new laws regarding data protection? Are you thinking about technical solutions to make the internet a more safe place regarding privacy and data protection? And the last point, do you think about new rules regarding secret services and the powers that governments can take and should take. At the end, if we finalize both our reports, I'm not sure if regarding different situations in our countries, we will be able to have common solutions and common measures to propose. But I think it's a good thing that from different places of our globe, we do think about measures and we ask for changes in all these questions. And so to have a clear signal, maybe at the same time, I think this would be very helpful. And let me ask a last question to you. You mentioned the published letter of Mr. Snowden. Are there already some reactions in the public from Brazil to this letter? Maybe it's too early for this. Would like to know. And you made very clear that there's no direct link between the inquiry itself and the question of having asylum. But there's a debate on this question, of course, even here in Europe. And so I will not ask if you will give asylum to Mr. Snowden, because I think this is much too early. But do you think that given that only because of the revelations of Mr. Snowden all these debates can take place, we should on both sides in Brazil, in Europe and maybe other places think about any kind of giving a safe place for Mr. Snowden? Thank you.
Okay, if I go back to my Brazilian colleagues and ask them if they could answer those three questions. And when you do, please, can you give us some content of your report as you answer those questions? We would be very interested as we are also finalising our report. It would be good to know what you're saying in your report as you answer those questions. Thank you.
Bom, começar as respostas tendo
Well, I'll try to start the replies because Ricardo got ahead of me there. He's spoken a lot on the subject before I got here. But if I haven't said everything, he will top up. I could begin with that last question. The lady who put that last question. We'd like to thank you once again for helping us with this. On Mr. Snowden's request, it's very recent. The letter was sent out yesterday and the newspapers started to spread it yesterday and today, particularly today. So it's a very recent thing. So we haven't got much to tell you in terms of any reaction from the Brazilian people, from the Brazilian public. A few people have reacted. Some MPs, some members of parliament have actually said they would be against granting asylum to Mr. Snowden, saying that this could create instability in an already difficult situation. Other members of parliament have taken the opposite view and said that they would very much like Brazil to grant asylum because this is a citizen requesting asylum. And in our understanding, he hasn't actually committed any crime as such. It has been Brazilian tradition in many other situations for Brazil to grant asylum to someone, whether their relations even when their relations with another country may be very difficult. But we'll have to see what happens with his request if he makes this application. And as we said earlier, this is something which is up to the executive. The Parliament does not have this within their power. We can say, for example, that we would be in favour of it. The Parliament could express a view, but it's the executive that has to decide. Now, I think we would certainly try to do everything to ensure that asylum is granted, because we believe that what he's done for the peoples of the world already is very significant, very important. Now, we all knew that advances in new technology would allow for this kind of spying to go on, in theory, but the revelation of this being done, especially by friends, by allies, has been very shocking. And this is why people feel very uncomfortable with it. Now, on the areas we intend to work on, there are lots of different areas where we could take action. But I think basically there are two main areas. There's the international aspect of it, which will depend on the international community. And then there's what we can do locally here in Brazil. Now, on the international front, even before Snowden's revelations, our government had an opinion on this, and we felt that it was necessary to change the way we deal with the internet in the world, change governance for the internet. Because there is a danger, particularly in terms of interference with the internet. We need it to be more multilateral. The Americans have too much power over the internet, we felt. And so that's why our government, in conjunction with Germany, put forward a resolution which was approved in the Human Rights Committee of the UN, and our President Dilma Rousseff also made a proposal to have this international conference in April. It isn't something which can take decisions, it doesn't have an official role, but the political impact of that global conference will be very important. I think it will have a very strong effect. And we, as members of Parliament, have to participate en masse at that event. And we hope that the European Parliament and other parliaments will send people to what will be a very significant conference on internet governance, which we're going to be holding in Brazil in April. Now, coming back to the domestic side of things, Brazil, some measures have already been introduced or are being introduced. The Brazilian Congress, that is the Senate and the House, have just voted a draft resolution regulating a monitoring committee on intelligence activities. That's very important. That's been going through for some time. It's been a bit stuck, but now this has been approved. As time goes on, we're going to submit a number of legislative bills which will deal with a whole series of different aspects, and they will mainly be to try to protect Brazilian citizens and their communications. Most internet companies tend to be American, and they have protection judicially in the United States. So any problem that a Brazilian citizen has here, they should be able to deal with it before the Brazilian courts. On the basis of a contract, at the moment they have to deal with it via the United States. We want to change this, and that's one of our objectives, to try and improve the situation for our citizens. And then there's the whole issue of data protection itself. Not just bringing the court, the jurisdiction to Brazil, because we don't think it should be dealt with in the United States, but here in Brazil the court should be able to deal with it. But we have a bill on data protection which hasn't been approved. It's before the House at the moment, House of Representatives here in Brazil, and it's going to come to the Senate after that. It's a bill which will establish a new civil framework, civil law framework to deal with the internet. And these are aspects of data protection which are very important. There's quite a lot of discussion about this. The President and the Parliament think it's very important that there are legal requirements for internet companies to have a data center on Brazilian territory. It's quite controversial. That's one of the most controversial issues, although there are others. But we think it's very important in order to have proper data security for Brazilian citizens, that they have a data center based on Brazilian soil. Then obviously rules on the secret services, on intelligence services. We're studying bills to change legislation there. we're also thinking in terms of the need for greater investment. We think the Brazilian government should be investing in counterintelligence a lot more. And we're talking to national companies dealing with this kind of issue. So greater investment in counterintelligence and greater investment in innovation, technology, research and development. The Ministry for Technology is very much involved in this in Brazil. Technology is marching on in this world, and we really need to invest more into that sector. And as I said, there was a meeting between the President of Brazil and the President of France, President Hollande. There is a suggestion there should be a partnership between Brazil and France where we develop such technologies together. We're also concerned about making progress in our legislation and in the way the Brazilian state functions so that we can have greater protection and greater security for our state and our people. And we need to make progress on that with our partners in Mercosur. We'll try to make progress together with our partners in Mercosur, but Brazil has to make progress in its domestic legislation on these areas as well. Now, I think I may have covered the other questions that were put by you. We are also discussing the idea of a particular agency, a Brazilian intelligence agency, but an agency which would protect people from cybercrime and such spying activities. At the moment, we feel very vulnerable given the dimensions of this sector. We're also going to suggest that a temporary committee be set up to propose reforms in Brazilian legislation on intelligence matters and to try to step up the monitoring of external intelligence services, foreign intelligence services. Now, obviously, the Committee of Inquiry will be proposing new laws. Some of that will come out in our report. We're already on track for that, and we'll be continuing to study such future legislation. And we will be making suggestions to the federal government. We think the federal government itself needs to take some important steps. Sometimes the populace, the people at large, don't feel that some of these things are important because they've got lots of other concerns, a lot of other worries that they feel might take priority. But in this new world where this kind of thing is becoming more and more worrying, it's clear that we have to defend ourselves. We have to defend ourselves and we have to establish partnerships with friendly countries. For example, the undersea cables, which we use. Very often we use cables which go via the United States and then reach other continents, so we have to be careful with those. I don't think Ricardo has any other further comments.
Thank you very much for that. Ricardo, first I asked about just quickly the main differences with the Echelon inquiry. I just wanted to answer him and just say that I remember in 2001 that the main similarity is the way that US and national authorities have not given us the information we wanted. There was the same reluctance. But the big dissimilarity, the big difference is the global reach of this inquiry. Echelon was one source of information. The press interest was so much smaller, and it was a different age. 2001 was before this interest in the internet and the way technology was going to reach into our lives. So, but I have to say that it was an excellent parliamentary inquiry for which we see a blueprint, and I'm glad that you're seeing that too. And it was Carlos Coelho who was the rapporteur, who happens to be another Portuguese member, so I don't know what that tells you. But okay, we're now going to have some more questions, and I begin with Carmen Romero Lopez, and that will be followed by Mr. Salafranca.
Mr. Bronze.
And then Mr. Bronze.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the chairman of the Brazilian Inquiry Committee and her colleague. I'm a Spanish MEP. I'd like to talk about the framework resolution that you've been pushing through in the United Nations, the resolution on this topic. So what is the scope of this resolution? What is the overarching aim of the resolution? What do you want the United Nations to do when it comes to this type of espionage? I have a suggestion. Do you think that we'd be able to destroy all the data that's been collected illegally? Could that be the final goal? Do you think that we'd be able to achieve the destruction of this data? And since this is very difficult from a technological point of view, what could Plan B be? And what about police cooperation? How can that work if there are no judicial orders that back these data? Thank you.
Next question in this round is from Mr. Salafranca, who is a member of our Foreign Affairs Committee. Mr. Salafranca.
Thank you very much. I'd like to greet you warmly. I'd like to greet Senator Vanessa, who's been a very good friend. She's a member of the Latin American Parliamentary Assembly, and it's a great pleasure to work with her within the framework of our committees of inquiry. I'm very sorry that I got here late. We met U.S. Congress members today, and we explained to them that the EP has the prerogative to ratify the international trade agreements that the EU negotiates. So at the moment, the atmosphere in the European Parliament wouldn't be very favourable to the ratification of the TTIP, which is being negotiated at the moment. We've already had 3 rounds of negotiations, and it is an agreement that is in the interest of both the US and the EU because of the numerous interests involved. Now, we'd like to know whether your Mercosur partners are going to accept the Brazilian offer to improve the EU-Mercosur agreement that was suspended in 2004. But the question that I have is the following. To what extent are the political relations between Brazil and the US affected by this case of espionage? We know that the Brazilian president didn't go ahead with her official visit. I know you've set up this committee of inquiry on espionage, so I'd like to know whether the situation is better after the formal apologies presented by the United States, and whether this stumbling block that stopped the president from going to the US has had an impact on the economic situation. The US is a very big trading partner for Brazil, so I'd like to know whether this incident has had a knock-on effect not only on political relations but economic relations, because when it comes to political relations it's pretty clear that there has been an impact. So how has it affected trade relations? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salafranca. And finally in this round, Mr. Bronze, who's a member of the LIBE Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the United Kingdom, the heads of the 3 security services have tried to imply that the revelations of Edward Snowden and others have helped terrorists and even put security operatives at risk. Certainly the revelations that have been made by visitors to this committee, the MI5 operative and the NSA personnel who gave evidence, assured us that they would do nothing to harm security, and indeed nothing that they revealed to us could conceivably have harmed our security. Would you come to the same conclusion about the revelations of Edward Snowden? Indeed, would you conclude that such claims by the security services are simply attempts to demonise Snowden and other whistleblowers, to cast doubt on his credibility, and perhaps to frighten others out of making similar revelations? Perhaps this Parliament or the Brazilian Parliament could inquire into this quite damaging claim, make an official response, and then put their conclusion on public record. Thank you.
Thank you to my colleagues for those questions. And again, Senators, over to you for your responses to those three questions. Thank you.
Vejam, algumas constatações.
Well, I'd just like to tell you exactly how we approach this in our Committee of Inquiry. The fact is that we haven't completed our report yet, no conclusion. But the first thing we would state is that there certainly has been violation of access. The NSA has certainly violated people's telecommunications and communications. That's what we've concluded. There has already been a ruling in a court in the United States which has condemned the interception of communications by the NSA. So the American people and some institutions in the US are beginning to react to what has gone on. There's a bit of a backlash there. Given what the US has contributed to democracy, to individual rights, and to privacy, there is some reaction. Up until now, it's been only a reaction from Europeans and South Americans, but now it's very important to have a reaction from the North American side as well. Now, terrorism has been used, counter-terrorism has been used as an excuse, as a reason for people trying to acquire different types of information, including economic information and business information, commercial information. Our oil company, Petrobras, for example, it's said that some of their strategic information has been bugged. There was a particular tender, an auction, which Petrobras was involved in competing with other international companies. And there's a whole series of very important business deals which have been involved, where people have been spying on this information. But counter-terrorism is always the shield behind which people hide, the excuse they're using. But they are actually using economic information, getting economic and strategic information from our states. I know you've had difficulties dealing with this, and we have the same experience. There seems to be quite a degree of arrogance in sections of the political institutions in the United States. They have great economic power. They have military supremacy, which they have consolidated over the past years. And they feel that they have a right to have an overview of what's going on everywhere and have this power over people. So you may have had difficulties dealing with them and getting them to understand, and we've had the same problem. Now, the UN resolution we have put forward is in a way symbolic. It's a symbolic position. It was led by Chancellor Merkel and President Rousseff for Brazil and Germany. But the idea was to try to make this point very clear, to try to urge countries to take another look at the way in which they deal with espionage activities. To try to, obviously we all have to preserve the interests of our states, but there is no limit here. We're talking about people having no criteria, no values being applied. They've just gone too far, going too far in the use of technology. And it's misuse of software and hardware, indeed, to infringe on people's privacy. This is the sort of solution that, sort of conclusion that we're beginning to draw in what's going on in Brazil. As we say, we want to try to beef up our legal framework, improve the legislation we have so that we can increase the protection of those markets. Now, Senator Graziotin talked about how to deal with internet governance by civil law frameworks, which we don't have at the moment. And we are very concerned about all these new technologies. How can we actually put any break, any restriction on this use of the internet? We really need to rethink how we can deal with this. We have the global village to handle here. How can we alter our relationship with such a new situation? As I say, we have to have a complete rethink. We have to rebuild our values here. This, to us, is really rather new because you in the European Parliament did some work, as we were saying earlier, in 2001 when you were assessing the Echelon case. This is our first experience of all of this. And obviously there's been a big leap forward between 2001 and 2013. For our citizens and for our societies, this kind of thing is even more significant. And there have been very different manifestations of all of this. Last Friday, as I said, President Hollande of France was visiting Brazil. We had the honor of hosting him. And President Hollande publicly demonstrated and expressed solidarity with what President Rousseff has said publicly about this, condemning this interference with private information. Now, the Brazilian state was really shocked that this kind of information was being hacked in this way, that our privacy was being violated by a country with whom we have very friendly historic relations. Now, in objective terms, our relations continue to be normal with the United States. President Rousseff had been invited to make a state visit by President Barack Obama. This has only been postponed, this visit. It hasn't been cancelled, it's been postponed. Relations continue pretty normally. We have to overcome these temporary difficulties with a serious and open dialogue. In our country, the US ambassador was saying in the papers that the US government and President Obama are working on this at the moment. They want some of the procedures to be reviewed and revised. And we hope that all this pressure at a global level will have an effect. As I say, we have a very good history of friendly relations and trade relations with the United States, and we'd like to return completely to normal as soon as possible. We are looking at the whole issue of monitoring intelligence activities in our country, and this is obviously related to the security of telecommunications. The Brazilian state has a lot of challenges to face. We've got a lot of other problems, and it's been very difficult to invest in what we need to invest in to fight cybercrime and this war of the internet. It is a real reflection of globalization. We have to live with it. We have to be able to face up to it. And what we're going to do is to make a set of recommendations to the government in terms of telecommunications protection, intelligence activities, trying to ensure that our country can be more self-sufficient in terms of protecting its internet systems and data protection. But we're looking at all of this with some care. Germany has a super modern system of protection, but they hacked them, they spied on them. They even spied on Chancellor Merkel's mobile phone. So even Germany, who's well ahead of us, with tremendous history of investment in science, technology and innovation. Even Germany wasn't able to protect the communications of their own head of government. So that's why we need your help. We need to combine our forces and our efforts with your experience and your knowledge of the situation over in the European Parliament. We need to make progress while respecting differences and while respecting the traditional history of our relations with these countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Senator Ricardo Farasá. That was a really in-depth contribution, and Senator Graziotan, both of you are clearly well on your subject, and we're very grateful for your time. I don't think there are any more calls for the floor. Do you have a supplementary or comment, Anna?
Queria perguntar aos nossos amigos.
I wanted to ask our friends from the Brazilian Senate something.
Acordos bilaterais que o Brasil.
In the bilateral agreements which Brazil has with the United States, for example, passenger name records, PNR, your agreements on PNR, or in other agreements such as counter-terrorism agreements. Are you thinking of the impact of your inquiry on those agreements? In the European Parliament, we actually asked for suspension of some of the agreements which are in force. We asked for these agreements to be suspended until we had a clear framework for data protection, which actually matches up to our standards for privacy and the protection of the fundamental rights of our citizens. So we've asked for suspension of these agreements with the United States. Are you thinking about such practical action in terms of the agreements that you have, bilateral agreements with the US? Thank you very much for that question. I just wanted to say that we are indeed looking at some of these agreements. We are analysing them. We have not actually reached the conclusion that we might ask for suspension of any of those agreements. We do think we have to weigh up the situation further and in more depth before we make any suggestions of that kind. As to our relationship with the United States, and the economic relations and trade relations, there has been no effect on that. And the President's made that quite clear to the Parliament. Obviously, action is being taken by the Executive and by the Parliament in setting up this Committee of Inquiry. However, it's been made quite clear that this should not affect, this should not interfere with our relations. We're just taking the steps which we feel are necessary. Now, we've not given you information about all the steps we're taking, but the Brazilian government is taking some very important steps domestically to try and deal with this situation. We've had the support of the federal government for our Committee of Inquiry. This conference next year will be very important, the conference in April. Senator Ferrasu has just said, just because the Americans has tremendous economic, military and technological power, I would add, just because they have all that power and they have this dominant position, doesn't mean that they have the right to interfere with international communications. And the fact is that Internet in 2001 certainly did not have the significance it has now for everybody in 2013. And in 2020 it'll be even more significant for people. Technology has become very much a part of our daily lives. Obviously it's part of defence of our state, it's people's daily lives in general. Technology has become crucial for everybody. So as we build up our legislative framework and when we have international agreements, obviously we have to make sure that these principles are respected. We want to ensure that the same rights are given to Brazil and Brazilian citizens as American citizens. And we think that we should have the same rights as you have in establishing such agreements. Just to add something at the end of this whole event. As we said, we think it's very important that we unite our efforts, and anything we say as the Brazilian Parliament and you say in the European Parliament, if we say it together, it will actually be taken into account. It will actually have more impact, more clout. So we think we really need to state how necessary it is for us to work hand in hand on this and to follow the same path. It's really important for us to have this dialogue. We have this consultation process underway on Edward Snowden's request for political asylum. We believe that it should be possible to grant that political asylum. It's a unilateral decision for Brazil. It's got nothing to do with trade relations or economic relations or anything else. It's an application for asylum, particularly because our tradition in diplomacy in Brazil has been to grant such applications for asylum. Now, you're closer to Russia over there. I wonder exactly what the European Parliament feels about this. I don't know whether you can make it easier for such an application to be accepted.
Let's not start on Russia. No, we will come. Thank you very much for your contribution. I mean, if I could end where we began, there's an extraordinary symmetry between our inquiries, and to have the chairman and rapporteur of the Brazilian inquiry, given what has been happening with Brazil, has been really helpful for us. And you gave it away when you talked about Echelon, that you've really been studying what we've been doing, and we are really helped by what you're doing. So in February, we will compare notes. We're going to keep in touch with you because it's really helpful to know how you're handling some of the more global questions about how non-US citizens are being treated. So we have a commonality there. So thank you so much for giving so much of your time this afternoon where you are. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it, and we will keep in touch. So thank you for your time.
Eles não escutam mais.
It was important to answer the questions that our colleagues asked us. On the, to my knowledge, no meu conhecimento.
Well, just hold on a second.
Speaking, so go ahead, yeah.
No meu conhecimento.
Well, to my knowledge, people were not, in the European Union, most countries were not asked for political asylum by Snowden. There was talk about this. There were movements in some countries, I think in Germany, perhaps Gregita could tell us, I think in some countries there were movements who said we should offer them asylum, but I don't think there was any formal request for asylum, any application made to any EU states. Now, our American colleagues from Congress today, when we talked about whether Snowden could be called upon to give a testimony to the European Parliament by video conference, when we mentioned this possibility, the Americans said this wouldn't be looked upon kindly in the United States. People in the United States wouldn't like that at all, because for them Snowden is not a whistleblower, he is a traitor. Now, obviously, we took note of their reaction, but the fact is that the European Parliament has already decided that we wish to have him act as a witness for us and have a communication with him by video conference quite soon.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. We do have to end it there, so thank you very much again for your time. And I want to thank my MEP colleagues here for turning up again on an afternoon so close to Christmas, and thank you to the interpreters for their patience. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Mr. Bronze, is a point of order.
Well, yes, let me take half a minute. I understand that the hearing is continuing tomorrow morning, but that the decision to have that hearing tomorrow morning was only taken last Friday. I didn't hear about it until yesterday, and I'd already made my travel arrangements to go home. I'm sure that you'll be able to hold back your tears at my absence, but nevertheless, I think we ought to give members good notice of meetings. I'm not trying to attack anybody's credibility or anything. Certainly not yours.
That's not the case. We're trying to be as helpful and as transparent to get the maximum attendance of members, and you have been attending regularly, so that's not the case. I think there's been a kind of difficulty in making sure that the working documents are being placed on time, and that's not been an easy thing to do. We have another one that's being delayed from yesterday, for which I take responsibility. So